Hi, we're here at ACTFL talking about Rodnaya, rech, an introductory course for heritage learners of Russian. We're here with authors Irina Dubinina and Olesya Kisselev. Thank you so much for being here. What is unique about this book?
And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for talking with us at this wonderful conference. So, Rodnaya rech is unique because it responds to the learning needs of heritage speakers of Russian who, in their majority these days, are born and raised in the United States or at any rate outside of a Russian-speaking country, and as a result have a significantly reduced input in the language as they're growing up and significantly reduced opportunities for language practice. Even if both of their parents speak Russian at home, this generation of heritage learners of Russian is limited in the language that they hear and speak. And so as a result, their linguistic profile is characterized by a greater grammatical restructuring than what we saw even 15, 12 years ago, and greater lexical lacuna, and that these problems that cascade down into syntactic level. And on top of that, as a rule, these learners cannot really read or write and do not have well-developed writing skills in Russian when they start taking a Russian course at the college level. And so it is the only textbook that we have in our field that addresses the needs of these types of learners. Mm-hmm. And Olesya, you probably would like to add something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think about this book being unique in a slightly different perspective. So it is theoretically grounded in a very, up until now, rarely applied theoretical paradigm, that of usage-based linguistics and usage-based pedagogy. So it's a sort of an experimental work for both of us in trying to learn as much as we could from theories, from usage-based theories and usage-based pedagogical approaches, and trying to approach our work and our work on heritage language pedagogy from this perspective. And so theoretically speaking, it's a sort of a new word in textbook writing. So we really hope to serve as an example of this sort of approach, pedagogical approach to language teaching in general and heritage language learning in particular.
Yeah, thank you. Can you talk a bit about the process of developing this textbook?
This is a great question. This is probably something that we could talk about forever. What are some highlights?
We were developing the textbook while also at the same time developing this pedagogical approach to working with heritage learners with the framework that Olesya just referenced, usage-based approach in linguistics. And in a way we had, we looked at the examples that our colleagues created for example, heritage speakers of Spanish. But our population of heritage speakers is very different, and also we're dealing with a very different language that is morphologically complex. So as we were developing the textbook, we were actually also developing our approach, our pedagogical approach to working with heritage speakers of such highly complex, morphologically complex languages as Russian. And we grounded our work in research that was available at the time and still is available now, work on heritage language linguistics in general, but also specifically on Russian heritage speakers and Russian heritage learners. Mm-hmm. And so we actually had to review a lot of research that we knew of at the time to create the textbook that really is grounded in research. Okay. And not just our experiences in the classroom, as valuable as they are.
Absolutely. Here's also probably a shout out to all the wonderful colleagues who we have in the field who were really instrumental to this process of developing our thinking, our pedagogical thinking about the textbook. We did a lot of discussions with colleagues. We definitely reached out to our colleagues, especially given the fact that we only had, up until that moment, we only had one textbook for heritage learners of Russian available, and it was obvious that it was a bit outdated, so there was very little we could fall back onto. But like I said, we had wonderful colleagues, wonderful community to reach out to, and really collaboratively think through what could be best in this.
Okay, yeah. So what do you hope that instructors will get out of this book?
Well, one, obviously we hope that they like the book, that they find it functional.
That's a given.
I know.
Yeah.
The book is structured in a way that allows the instructors, especially those who are not particularly experienced in teaching Russian as a heritage language, to really start working in their heritage learner classrooms successfully. So it's sort of we hope so. It's well outlined. It has a very clear architecture. It is quite obvious how to go through the assignments, how to structure lessons around the materials. And the textbook and the corresponding website, which contains additional materials as well as all the homework assignments and all the additional assignments that students could engage in. So we did think of our colleagues and the practicality of the textbook. So we were trying to build it into the architecture of the book for sure. What else could we say about this?
And I would like to add maybe 3 points. One is precisely because we were thinking about our colleagues, like what would our colleagues need to teach a course with this textbook in the most effective way. So we included detailed grammatical explanations, which are student-facing. They are for the students, but hopefully they also help instructors prepare for the lessons and kind of help them look at particular grammatical points from the point of view of a heritage learner, like referencing back the research that I just mentioned when we were creating the textbook. The second point I would like to mention is that the architecture of the textbook is such that we hope it would allow instructors to use the textbook in different settings. So those who have large populations of heritage speakers of Russian on their campuses, as we do at Brandeis University, could use this textbook in a specialized course for heritage learners. But we also know that the majority of our colleagues actually work with heritage learners in their mainstream courses and have to give a lot of individualized attention to these learners. So the textbook could be used this way. We also thought about the fact that there are perhaps in some areas of the country there are significant populations of heritage learners of Russian in high schools, and so this textbook could be used in high school, in a high school context. We actually talk to our high school colleagues to see what kind of things we should be watching out for if this textbook is to be used at a high school level. I remembered my third point. So as we all know, when you get a group of heritage learners together, you basically have as many levels in the classroom as there are students in the classroom. And so what we also try to do in the textbook is to, Olesya mentioned it at some point, to have additional materials on the website, on the accompanying website where the workbook exercises live, so that instructors working with various levels of heritage learners could differentiate instruction. It is always a big problem for us working with heritage learners, so we try to take that into account.
perhaps we can add to that this textbook can be used as an almost sort of individual study textbook if you do not have a community school to go to, but perhaps have a couple of friends who are interested in improving their heritage Russian. You could easily form a group and just utilize the textbook and the website. Kind of have a fun experience with it.
Yeah. And speaking of the website, can you talk a bit about the ancillary materials in general?
Yeah. So on the website, we have the workbook activities. And they're clearly marked in the textbook kind of to help instructors and students figure out which exercises on the online platform go with which points in the textbook. And we have various types of activities on the website, so it's some of them are very form focused, filling the blank, complete the sentence that we gave you the beginning for,
Right.
And they gradually move up in the towards more holistic assignments, describe a painting or write a story. So that's what's available on the website, and we also have two documents that instructors probably would be interested in. One is the teacher's manual, which describes our philosophy in creating the textbook, our pedagogical approach to working with heritage learners of Russian. It has sample quizzes, assignments, a grading rubric for free writing assignments, and a portfolio. And then we also have a student guide, which provides guidelines for heritage learners of Russian to work with vocabulary, to understand what it means to know a word, specifically using the Russian national corpus. And this is kind of one of the unique features of the textbook, that students also develop their digital literacy skills for the field of language learning.
I might also add that in this document that we developed specifically for the students, we go a little bit into the terminology, if you will. We actually talk to our prospective students about what it means to be a heritage learner of Russian, so that we explain to them a little bit about how their language learning is maybe a little different from that of a typical L2 learner. We talk about the sort of sociolinguistic characteristics of heritage language learner. So I like the fact that we actually address this book to them, so that they know how and why we're using the approach that we're using.
Yeah. Thank you. So how can instructors tailor this kind of textbook program to their own needs in the classroom?
Right. This is a fabulous question. Of course, there are plenty of ways one can work with the textbook, and perhaps even there are ways that we haven't thought about. But we also, by the way, speaking of additional materials, we wanted to mention that the website also contains readings that were developed as a sort of somewhat separate module. Well, all the readings are connected thematically to each unit, but they are a standalone module. One of the reasons behind it was that we wanted to give the freedom to the instructors in terms of deciding whether they wanted to start with a reading, with a more global, if you will, introduction into the topic, and then having done the reading. And by the way, we do feature both fiction and somewhat academic writing, as well as journalistic newspaper pieces, various genres and various types of reading texts. So one could start with a more global introduction to the topic and then move into the specifics, the focus on form, focus on meaning of words, going through the more linguistically oriented assignments, and then sort of spiral back into the meaning-based assignments. Or one could sort of go through all the linguistic material and then award the students with this yummy, good reading assignment that is also, by the way, structured in a way that can be done a little differently for those who are less advanced and those who are more advanced. So you can give more reading to those of your students who are more advanced in the language, and to modify these assignments for those who are still sort of struggling readers and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that was probably an important thing to mention.
Well, and maybe to add to the censor, you're right. This is a very important feature of the textbook, but. We also, we mentioned before that we were thinking about in what contexts in our field, in the field of Russian language teaching, instructors encounter heritage learners. We already mentioned that we hope that teachers at the high school level could use the textbook, maybe at community-based schools for older teenagers. We really had adult learners in mind, and so anyone who works with young adult learners would, we hope, benefit from having the textbook. But also, to answer this question, we think that instructors who work with first-time learners, second language learners of Russian, they could find something useful in the textbook as well as a way to supplement their advanced level curriculum. Mm-hmm. And we do know of some colleagues who work with traditional learners of Russian, second language learners, who use our grammatical explanations and exercises from the textbook, especially those that concern highly complex topics, which in Russian are verbal aspect, verbs of motion, prepositional usage. So instructors could tailor the textbook to those needs as well.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add about the book before we sign off?
Well, I am particularly proud of the artwork that we were able to include in the book. I think it's a somewhat close to us. We really love the artists we worked with. Mm-hmm. So it's just something that I think makes the book a little more fun to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to add that in creating the textbook, Olesya already mentioned, we really thought about our learners as well, our future students, our own students, learners. And so we tried to select texts for reading or short excerpts for, like prompts for essays, or even simple sentences for filling the blanks that reflect the reality in which our learners live, which is bilingual, bicultural reality, where there are at least two languages, maybe more, where there may be mixed families where only one parent speaks Russian and the other one doesn't, where grandparents play a huge role in the language development, but also cultural development, and also raising these learners. Mm-hmm. And so we really try to maintain that context, that larger context, and we hope that it speaks to the learners that way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yes, of course. So we've been talking about Rodnaya Rech. You can request an exam copy at press.georgetown.edu.